Hello everyone, this is Dwight Woods at the I Love Jeet Kune broadcast, flying solo again and trying to work my way through the technical difficulties, and I have no idea if you can hear me because I have no feedback here. So if somebody will you guys know that Carlos is the one who's the technical guy, so he knows how to do all this stuff, and I certainly don't. But I think there's a little icon there that says there are a couple of people who are actually watching the broadcast. So I will consider that you guys can hear me, even if I can't hear you. Okay, so there's like somebody just gave it a like, so I think we're live. And give me 1 second. Let me just turn on my backup camera here in case I lose what do you call it, Wi-Fi or something. And give me 1 sec. Okay, so you guys kind of snuck in the back door, and I didn't get to do an official opening of this broadcast. I think this is broadcast number 6. I'm gonna be wearing the spectacles because I'm gonna work from some notes that I made here on different things. You know that that we're constantly okay. Cool. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. So this is how that's how it works, and that's how it looks when Carlos is in charge. Okay. All right, if I keep this up and I get real good at this, I might just kick him out and run all of all these things. I'm just kidding. So wait, so now I'm supposed to do my best Carlos impersonation. So pound the likes and share, and what's the other thing? I think you're supposed to say where you're coming in from. I think that's the other thing. Anyhow, enough of that nonsense. So let's go ahead and get started on this. So today we're gonna revisit the ongoing discussion of misconceptions of what is and what is not. Thanks, Bradley. Okay, cool. All right, everybody can hear me. All right. So we're gonna revisit the ongoing discussion of what is and what is not Jeet Kune. We're gonna take a look at some Jeet Kune personalities. And then if I don't run out of time, and if you excuse me again, because I'll have to go off camera for a second and grab my notes, we're going to talk a little bit about. I should have done it in chronological order. I wanted to do an analysis somewhat of Bruce Lee's roles in front of and behind the camera in his movies. The one that I started working on earlier today was Way of the Dragon, or what some people call Return of the Dragon. So, well, that's my plan. That's my plan for right now. So I know that it seems like we keep harping on this question every broadcast, but it's almost as if it's like trying to train a child, you know, and you have to teach them these lessons more than once. So we have to keep repeating that in the beginning, yes, it's true. Bruce Lee did talk about boxing, about Wing Chun and boxing and fencing, and that was crucial to the development of his fighting style. But again, if anyone was to spend some time just reading what Bruce Lee wrote, then it's very obvious that he went way beyond that three art breakdown of boxing, Wing Chun, boxing, and fencing. Okay. Last time that Carlos and I were on, we talked briefly about the idea of, like, I see a connection between the experiment that is the United States of America and the experiment that was Jeet Kune. So, for example, in the United States, we have the rule of law, and the Constitution is the highest law of the land. And the First Amendment to the Constitution gives everybody the right to say what they want and to say what they think. And similarly in Jeet Kune Do, so the law of the land allows people to say what they want about Jeet Kune Do and what they think about Jeet Kune Do, but also within the art itself, people have the freedom to think as they want to think, right, and to say what it is that they want to say. So I, for one, would never object to people being able to give their opinions on Jeet Kune Do. Even if it's somebody whose opinion is obviously not one that is well versed in deep study of the art and the philosophy of Jeet Kune Do. And so we had a little discussion on the I Love Jeet Kune Do page earlier this week, or I think or maybe last week. And again, it was, you know, some people in the school of thought that if you didn't do, or if you don't do what Bruce did, and I always find that interesting when these people they refer to him as Bruce, like if they're best friends, which is cool. And then also when they talk about, well, if you're not doing what Bruce did, now how are you going to know what Bruce did unless you were there? Right? See, so I have a close relationship with someone who was there for a period of time. His name is Dan Inasano. He's been my teacher for over 30 years. So if Dan Inasano says something, I'll listen to him because he was there. Now, my relationship with other Jeet Kune Do luminaries like Taki Kimura, the late Jerry Poteet, the late Ted Wong, you know, people like Pete Jacobs and Bob Bremer and what have you, my relationship is not as close with them because they are my seniors in Jeet Kune Do and not my instructors, but those are guys who were also there. So if they say something, then you listen to them. Other people who talk about if you're not doing what Bruce did are referring to what they saw Bruce Lee do on screen. They're referring to what in some circles we call cinematic or theatrical Jeet Kune Do, and not the functional Jeet Kune Do. So I'll just tell, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I'll just tell you right now, that's a pet peeve of mine, especially when it comes to the Filipino Kali, because there's that group that tells you Bruce wasn't into Kali or Bruce didn't, and we have talked about this before, but again, like I said at the beginning, this is something that has to be repeated because the repetition is one way that people learn new information or they take in new information. Repetition is, as my friend Ricky Amador likes to say, repetition is the mother of skill, right? And so we have to talk about these things. And I have seen enough pictures of Bruce Lee behind the scenes with double stick, with double dagger, with single stick to give me a clue that he perhaps spent a little bit more time than just learning how to swing the tablatuyo or the nunchaku. He probably spent a little bit more time in the Filipino martial arts than he might be given credit for. All right. Anyhow, to get back to this idea, so there was one person whose contention was they seem to be saying that Ted Wong, for example, right, is a better representative of Jeet Kune Do because Ted Wong's footwork was eerily reminiscent of Bruce Lee's footwork. In other words, when Ted Wong moved, and I saw that for myself, I trained maybe 2 or 3 times with Ted Wong, and so I saw it for myself, and I will tell you that I felt exactly the same way. The first time I saw him not even move, it was like Ted Wong glided, right? The rest of us, we do footwork. Ted Wong glided, and I had never seen anything like it other than Bruce Lee on camera. And so I can understand why somebody's contention would be, okay, this guy moves just like Bruce Lee moved, so therefore he is a better student and a better representative of Bruce Lee because he looks like Bruce Lee did. Yeah, that's an interesting approach, but it might be somewhat misguided. Because, for example, there are a lot of Bruce Lee quotes are all over the internet these days. We use them from time to time right here at I Love Jeet Kune when we'll put a quote to a photograph and put that as a post. So I'm pretty sure that that you guys. Let me see if I think I have it here. Let me see if I can find it so that I read it directly. But it's the quote that Bruce Lee has about not copying people, and I'm convinced that Ted Wong was not attempting to copy Bruce Lee. Ted Wong was training what he had been taught, and so he ended up moving the way his instructor did. I asked Dan Inosanto something similar many years ago, if it was okay to try to copy someone's style of moving, and he said yes, if that person's style is exemplary. So in other words, when I started Muay Thai, for example, when I started training in Muay Thai, I tried to move just like Surachai Sirasut did. I tried to copy him because to me his way of moving in Muay Thai was like the epitome of what Thai boxing should look like. So you try to copy Chai Sirasut, and then your Muay Thai ends up becoming decent. So I think that's what happened with Ted Wong. What Bruce Lee said is, here it is: always be yourself, express yourself, have faith in yourself. Do not go out and look for a successful personality and duplicate it. So right there is the instruction to not try to copy anyone, not try to be anyone other than yourself. So I don't think, I'll say it again, I don't think Ted Wong was trying to be Bruce Lee. Ted Wong was being Ted Wong and just ended up moving in a very similar fashion to the way that his teacher moved. So again, people talk about doing what Bruce did. So for me, I've seen Bruce Lee do double stick, and I've seen Bruce Lee do double dagger, and I never saw him on screen do single stick. I've seen him posing with single stick, so that is enough evidence for me to continue to train in Filipino Kali, and I'll come back to the Filipino Kali in a few minutes. Here's another thing that you must learn to defend against, right, in the JKD world. It's when people say something like, well, Bruce, and again, they're on first name basis, right? Bruce studied all the arts, and they literally say all the arts. All. I mean, that's 100%. So that means that Bruce Lee trained in 100% of the martial art methods that existed on planet Earth at the time that he lived. I don't think so. Now, I'm not saying that Bruce Lee didn't have extensive, didn't do extensive research and reading. I mean, we've talked about this before. His personal library consisting of over 2,000 books, right? A lot of which were martial art books. But I doubt that Bruce Lee trained in, what would they call it? Let's say Kuksul Wan, right? I know my friend Rory Haddad, who's a Korean martial artist. Well, he's Jamaican, but he studies Taekwondo, right? I'm pretty sure that Bruce Lee didn't get to train in Kuksul Wan from Korea. I doubt he got to train in Vo Vinam from Vietnam, and I'm pretty sure that he didn't get to spend any time in Cambodian kickboxing, I think, right? And so I wouldn't use the term all, because all means 100%. I understand what people are trying to say. I think what they're trying to say is that Bruce Lee did intense research into as many methods as he could come across in order to arrive at that understanding of things like motion, like distance and timing, and that type of thing. And so the idea is not that he studied all the arts. The idea is, what they're really trying to say is that Bruce Lee studied extensively, judiciously, in order to arrive at a deep level of understanding. And I think that that's evident in when he says something like, before I studied the art, or before I understood the art, a punch was not a punch and a kick was not a kick. But now that I have studied and truly understood, I'm paraphrasing here, now that I've studied and truly understand the art, a punch is a punch. Right, and so again, so let's pick on Rory again, because he's still watching, right? So Rory is, I think Rory's like a 4th degree or 5th degree black belt in Taekwondo. His front stance is probably not drastically different from the front stance that is employed by someone in Hapkido, let's say. They're both Korean styles, right? The front stance of somebody in Shotokan, in Japanese or Okinawan karate, might be a little bit deeper, but essentially they're going to have the same structure. A front stance in some Shaolin Kung Fu system, they're pretty much going to look the same way. And so, having arrived at a point where you truly understand the art, you recognize that a front stance is a front stance. And that's merely the beginning. Because now in Jeet Kune Do, the idea is, well, do we have to have a thing called a front stance, separate and distinct from a thing called a back stance, separate and distinct from a thing called a cat stance, separate and distinct from a thing called a horse stance? Or are we seeking to be more efficient, and so what we have is a ready position or a fighting position? Right? So the idea of all the styles, no, all the arts, no, but you do as much research as you can. And if you think about it, let's compare it or contrast it with the study of language. In order to become fluent, you do have to know the specific words in a specific language. But have you ever met people who speak Spanish, let's say, who can carry on a conversation with somebody who speaks Italian? Or have you ever met somebody who speaks Spanish who can carry on a conversation with somebody who speaks Portuguese? Now, nobody is fluent in the other person's language, but they do realize that there is a similarity, that there's a connection between the languages, and so they are able to communicate. So you might not necessarily have to spend 10 years in a classical or traditional system like Shotokan in order to derive an understanding of another classical system like Wado Ryu or Shito Ryu, because there's going to be enough similarities, right? Okay, so I'm talking a whole lot about the classical arts and what have you, and we really want actually, that reminds me of something else, because somebody said that so what Carlos asked people to do was, if you're going to post on the I Love Jeet Kune Do pages, he asked people to post stuff which is relevant to JKD, and if you're going to post something about your Kung Fu style, but what you're posting is that here's how I became interested in Kung Fu. It's because of Bruce Lee, this and Bruce Lee that. I'm making this up off the top of my head, right? So if somebody posted something like, well, I've never been able to train in Jeet Kune Do. I've always wanted to train in Jeet Kune Do. No, let me try to find a better example. Okay, the kid in Afghanistan, I think they call him the Afghan Bruce Lee, right? So I don't think he has any formal training in Jeet Kune Do, because there is no, as far as I know, there's no qualified Jeet Kune Do people in Afghanistan. But he certainly belongs on the I Love Jeet Kune Do page, because what he is about, what he is doing, is definitely connected to what we are doing here, right? But if you put a post, and I really do not want to come off as if I'm criticizing anyone, because Bruce Lee is loved by tons of people outside of the art of Jeet Kune Do. Bruce Lee is loved by people who are not even in martial art whatsoever. And so I can understand if a kid who just got his yellow belt in Taekwondo and is excited about it, and the internet is, as of right now, an open forum, and so he posts that he's, you know, that he just got promoted at his Taekwondo school. I get that, but it's not relevant to JKD. And so what we're trying to illustrate to people is that that's what we want you to do. There is so much discussion in JKD itself that when you post on the page, we want you to be part of that discussion and not bring in something in from you know, somewhere else, right? So let's see. I'm checking my notes here again to make sure that I go into everything. Oh yeah. So here was the other thing. When we talk about ridiculous stuff that people might talk about sometimes, there's then the notion that Bruce Lee took the best techniques from different arts, or the best techniques from different styles. And I've even heard people talk about Bruce Lee took the best moves, right? So it's almost as if they're minimizing the minimizing the art of Jeet Kune Do and bringing it down to a series or a collection of moves or a collection of techniques. And that's not at all what Jeet Kune Do is about. And again, the evidence for that is right there in Bruce Lee's writings, if you take the time to read them, if you take the time to study with a legitimate certified instructor, and if there is nobody in your area, as is wont to happen sometimes, you still have access to material. I mean, we have the Quick Skill series that's available to people here at I Love Jeet Kune Do. And by the way, volume 2 of that will be coming out very early in the new year. So again, people talk about Bruce Lee took the best techniques, and even people who should know better, you will still hear them say something like that Bruce Lee took the best techniques or the best moves from the different styles and put them together. That's not it, because as many people know, Bruce Lee talked a lot about becoming effective, or even developing a fighting system is not about adding on and adding on and adding on. It's not the daily increase, it's actually the daily decrease, right? He used the idea of a sculptor who starts with a lump of clay, and then by chiseling away at that lump of clay, you end up with the beauty of what was contained inside. It's not by adding more clay to your original mound that you become an artist. So it is the daily decrease, what he called hacking away at the unessentials, right? So when people say that, when Bruce Lee studied all the styles, Bruce Lee took the best techniques, they are trying in their limited way to express their admiration for the extensiveness of the research and perhaps the knowledge and what have you that Bruce Lee brought to the public in the martial art world, right? Yeah, let's see here. Okay, so this brings us now to the idea of Jeet Kune Do concepts. And if there's ever been anything that I was that I was glad to see the death of, it was this ridiculous argument of Jeet Kune Do concepts versus original Jeet Kune Do. And at one time, there was even this thing called pre-1973 JKD. I'm reminded of this because I was watching an interview with Sifu Inasano that was conducted by, I think it's John Graydon. And I wonder how many of you guys know who John Graydon is, because this is a guy who was so influential in the early 90s, I'd say, in the development of professional martial art in this country and beyond. Anyhow, let's talk about Jeet Kune Do concepts. I'm not sure if we've talked about that on this broadcast before, but here's the deal. What Dan Inasano, this is my breakdown, this is my analysis, right? Because, you know, I'm an armchair psychologist, right? Dan Inasano used the word concepts to illustrate that there were certain guidelines or procedures or hang on a second. Mahesh says, I studied Jeet Kune Do college through Birmingham Impact. That must be Birmingham Impact JKD. So out of London, that's the late Dave Carnell, I believe. Dave was the founder of Impact JKD, and again, if I remember correctly, Dave's lineage. Mahesh, send me a message if I'm right on this. That Birmingham Impact. I don't remember if Dave himself was from Birmingham, but it's definitely Dave Carnell, and Dave was a student of Cass Magda's, correct? Okay, yeah, right, okay, so, all right, so, I'm not losing my mind, see? So, actually, if when something like that happens, right, see, then I go, okay, so all the people who think I'm crazy when I'm talking about JKD, see, when I do something like that in public, right, when I pull a memory from like 30 years ago, then we go, oh, okay, he might not be crazy, he actually knows what's going on, right? Okay, so Dan Inasano and Jeet Kune Do concepts. I think quite simply, here was the idea. He didn't want to commercialize Jeet Kune Do, and so the idea was, well, look, here are the concepts of Jeet Kune Do, and here's how we can use them to gain an understanding of these other martial arts systems. Or, oh, look at this. Look at how Thai boxing, for example, when they use their what we call the long foot jab, right, or the teep, against the rear leg round kick, right, the te sai or the te kwa, right, what you're doing is an interception. So here now we discover, oh, so the idea of the way of the intercepting kick can be found in Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do, and it can be found in Muay Thai. Oh, well, geez, what else is there in Muay Thai what else is there that exists in Muay Thai that might just coincidentally exist in Bruce Lee's methodology? Well, maybe Muay Thai is a thing that we should study, especially since it gets you in wicked cardiovascular shape. All right, okay, so you get my point? That's the idea behind the concepts thing. So now let's talk about, because Dan Inasano is synonymous with Bruce Lee and Filipino martial arts. So now we have to talk about one of my favorite things, right, which is Filipino Kali's influence in Jeet Kune Do. In Dan Inasano's 1980 Jeet Kune Do book, Richard Bustillo, the late Richard Bustillo, talks about I think it's Richard Bustillo, that both arts stress the lead hand, because when you go single stick, it's the lead hand. When you go single dagger, it's the lead hand. And then Bruce Lee stressed the lead hand. Both arts, because of the Wing Chun influence in Jeet Kune Do, Wing Chun might call it trapping, and Kali might refer to it as check-in or safety factor. So again, we have coincidences or similarities in an approach, in methods that come from different places, right? So, makes me think again of the experiment that is the United States of America, where people who came from different places came to this one country and learned to assimilate, learned to blend aspects of their, as a matter of fact, okay, so Mahesh is still on, right? He says Kali is my favorite style of martial arts, right? So Mahesh, if you could back me up on this if I'm correct. In England, let's say in London, Indian food is now considered to be British food because when it comes to the culinary society in England, curry is so integral, right? It's been so integrated into British culture that now everybody says, yeah, we'll go get a curry, right? Am I okay? Yeah, see, right? So that's what I'm talking about. So it's quite possible then for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, Pencak Silat, Filipino Kali, whatever, to become fully integrated into this thing that we call Jeet Kune Do. And then to say, oh, well, but back in the 1920s, Indian food wasn't so well integrated into London society, so we can't do it now. That'd be ridiculous. So to say that Bruce Lee didn't do Muay Thai, so you can't integrate Muay Thai into Jeet Kune Do would be just as ridiculous. All right. Okay. So let's move on here. So this is the thing I wanted. We talked a little bit about Sifu Dan and Jeet Kune Do concepts, and I'm wondering how many people out there ever realized. I don't know if it was deliberate or if it's just something that happened to occur, but Bruce Lee chose, out of the 3 people he chose as to be his lieutenants, Bruce Lee chose 2 people who happened to be naturally self-effacing. Now, if you know me, you know I would never be disrespectful towards my teacher or someone who is my teacher's senior, right? So when I say that these 2 gentlemen were originally self-effacing, I'll back it up. So here's what, let's see, Take Kimura said this about himself, right? Mahesh, I'm gonna go through your comments later on. I can only see like the first few words of what you're saying, but I thank you very much for playing along with me on this broadcast, sir. Right? So Take Kimura says that not making waves was the order of the day when he was a kid, which meant accepting the role of the second-class citizen. And he ended up thinking, well, I better not do so-and-so. And as a child, he never did. He says, but then Bruce Lee came along and said, well, you're just as good as the next guy. And if you think, now listen to this. This is what Take Kimura says Bruce Lee said to him. If you think in your heart that it's right, then to hell with what anybody else thinks about it. And I think that's a clue into how deeply invested Bruce Lee was in helping to develop not just the physical skills of his students, but their maybe even psychological and mental skills, right? So, so he said, if you think in your heart it's right, then to hell with what anybody else thinks and do it. Now, Dan Inosanto said this. He says, I was very shy and bashful and a real introvert, and Bruce Lee helped my personality by teaching me to be more confident and more outgoing. He said to me, well, why are you bashful? Have you ever thought of that, Dan? And I said, well, I guess I'm scared of people. And he asked, well, why are you scared of people? And Inosanto says, he said, well, I'm scared of making mistakes. And he said, okay, well, what's the worst thing that could happen to you if you made a mistake in public? And so I guess in the conversation, they listed everything, right? Like the worst things that Inosanto could imagine. And he says that that helped him to see through the issue. All right, so this is in the early days, and this is, I think I know there was a 4-year difference between Bruce Lee and Dan Inosanto, and I'm pretty sure it was maybe even twice that, maybe 8 years or more age difference between Taki Kimura and Bruce Lee. It might have been like 13 years or something. But here is, here's a young guy who is so well developed that he's made the connection between the physical and the mental and the emotional and therefore the spiritual, right? And he's not selfish with it. He passes it on to people that he cares about, right? So let's see, what was the note I made here, right? That right from the start, Bruce Lee was also teaching that Jeet Kune Do is a vehicle for personal growth and development and not just a method of combat, right? So he mixed the philosophy of combat with the philosophy of life, right? So you know how, and excuse me if you guys can hear the lawn people outside. They're doing some work around the house, all right? So I'm sorry if that's piping in here. So Bruce Lee mixed the philosophy of combat with the philosophy of life. And so just like you have to be prepared to deal with a self-defense situation, you have to prepare yourself to deal with the situations that will crop up in your life. And so, and this was something I mentioned, John Graydon. And John Graydon was somebody that I heard talk about stuff like that. Also, there's another guy that you guys should check out, Tom Callis. I'm out of, so out of like owning a martial arts school, so I don't follow the business ends of it. But John Graydon and Tom Callis in the early days did so much to help people learn how to run an effective school. And so Tom Callis was one who also talked about using your self-defense skills, your physical self-defense skills, to become skilled maybe at defending yourself from the environment, right? So again, it's the idea of the concept or the philosophy of what it is we're doing as martial artists, and then applying that to lives. Because I dare say that everyone who is an active member and a very involved member, even the ones with whom you might disagree, right? As martial artists, martial art defines us to a certain degree as human beings. And so when you, somebody remind me to tell Carlos next time we have to have a moderator, because I appreciate all the comments that are coming in, guys. I promise you I'll go through them when we finish the broadcast, which will be in just a few minutes, and I'll reply to anything if anybody's asked me a direct question. But thank you so much for commenting and sticking with me on the live broadcast and giving me the confidence to do this by myself, because I always thought that, you know, Carlos is more technical than I am. And I don't know if you guys, like, the big joke is that I finally got myself an iPhone 7, right? So I waited until they brought the 10 in, and then I got a 7. Okay, so let's go into the final laps of this thing here. When you start expanding your base of knowledge, it can take you down paths that you may not have first imagined for yourself. So Dan Inosanto, for example, had already embarked on his search for truth in martial art, and this is how I understand it. So he had already started training with a couple of different Filipino martial art instructors by the time he met Bruce Lee. And so Bruce Lee was added to the roster of people under whom he was training. So he was leaving Southern California and going up to Northern California to train with people up there, like in Stockton and San Francisco. And so adding Bruce Lee, because Bruce Lee lived in Oakland at the time, so adding Bruce Lee to the roster was a relatively easy thing to do, right? So I think that the fact that Inosanto was already exploring his martial art knowledge, I think that when he and Bruce Lee met, that it was a meeting of minds, because Bruce Lee had started his exploration, Dan Inosanto has started his exploration, and so I think that there was a meeting of minds and a sharing of information and knowledge and what have you, and that's how we ended up with the king of the nunchaku, right? Because it's well reported that Bruce Lee, Dan Inosanto shared his knowledge of the what we all call the nunchuck, right, with Bruce Lee, and Bruce was like, yeah, this thing is going into the movies with me. So this is what I told you I would mention, so I'll end with this. But we still get people today who are saying, oh, actually somebody said this about us, because we had a little get-together last weekend, and then we were in the garage, and somebody broke out the sword and dagger, and so I did a sword and dagger thing, right? So we're at a party, nobody is dressed to work out. So, I mean, when I look at the video, I go, shoot, I hope nobody sees this and thinks that this is how we train, right? Because I'm standing tall. I'm not even in the half squat position, which is how we train with weapons. But anyhow, but somebody makes a comment about, oh, I looked at that video and I didn't see anything that Bruce Lee did. Man, how do you know that Bruce Lee didn't train stick and dagger? Because you weren't there, right? And like I said, I've seen enough pictures of Bruce Lee with Filipino weaponry to think, man, he might have looked at some other stuff and it just never made it into, for example, the Game of Death. Who knows where Bruce Lee might have gone with his, exposing other martial art systems in his movies, right? So, this is what I'll finish with. You'll hear people refer to weapons training, and they'll say, oh yeah, and even sometimes Kali people, and this is just my personal opinion, I think they should know better, because, so feel free to disagree with me. They should know better when you say that the weapon is an extension of the empty hands. No. See, in training Filipino Kali, one of the keys is in understanding how the motion of the weapon could be translated or interpreted into the motion of the empty hand. So that's one thing. So it's not an extension. It's not like, well, my hand only reaches this far, but then when I have the stick, now my hand, the reach of my hand is extended. No. There's a little bit more to it than that. So one idea is understanding motion with or without the weapon. And then the other thing is the development of attribute. And for me, this is why Filipino Kali is so important in my development as a Jeet Kune Do martial artist. Bruce Lee said that attribute development is one of the highest levels of skill or understanding in Jeet Kune Do. If you get really fast with double stick, since it's your arms and hands that are propelling the double stick, guess what? Your hands get faster. Now, maybe Bruce Lee didn't need any of that supplemental training. Maybe he was just superhuman, right? But us mere mortals, or me as a mere mortal, I need as much help as I can get. So I learned to whip the double stick real fast. That's it, Mahesh. Heaven 6 and all the variations, and then it makes my empty hands really fast. So I remember very, very soon after I started training with Sifu Inosanto, I read something, I think it was like in the handout for his school or what have you, and it talked about the Filipino weaponry being a method of turbocharging your empty hand system, right? Okay, so Kali, JKD training method, development of attributes. That is going to be it for today's broadcast. I hope you guys had a good time. I enjoyed. That's funny, Mahesh. Right? I enjoyed doing this. The other thing we promised you is that going into the new year, the broadcast will no longer just be my ugly mug or Carlos's ugly mug. Sometimes it'll be the two of us on screen, and but at other times I will be interviewing other Jeet Kune notables as soon as I can work out the technicalities of it. Right. So, but in time we will have a broadcast next Wednesday. I believe Carlos is still in town, so we'll try to do that. We'll try to do that together out of the boardroom instead of here in the den. And if you guys have any questions or any topics that you'd like for us to cover in upcoming episodes of the I Love Jeet Kune broadcast, feel free to get in touch, reach out, and send them to us, and we will handle them to the best of our ability. All right, thanks everybody for spending some time with me. Merry Christmas and all that good holiday stuff, and we'll see you next week. Everybody take care.